Hi everyone, welcome back to the ALMA certification training. My name is Shmuel, and today we'll be discussing fulfillment configuration troubleshooting. The session is intended for staff users with the general system administrator role or the fulfillment administrator role. If you have not yet listened to the certification training introductory session, please do so before continuing, as it does contain some useful information about the certification training in general. In addition, this session builds on the information contained in previous certification training sessions, namely the session on organizational structure, the session on circulation desks, and the session on fulfillment infrastructure. If you have not yet listened to those sessions, you may have trouble following along in this session, but you are welcome to stay if you like. I'm presenting the session from a live sandbox environment, similar to your own sandbox. For purposes of today's session, I've made a few changes, but we'll fix those as we go along. I do encourage you to follow along in your own sandbox environment. Feel free to pause the recording at any point in order to try out some of the things I'm demonstrating or make note of any questions you may have. We're planning a live question and answer call following the training. Please do make note of any questions you have in preparation for that call and submit them to your project team in advance so we can come to that meeting prepared to respond. You may also want to search the ALMA Online Help for answers to your questions. Let's get started. The first scenario we're presented with is a patron who would like to place a request for a physical item. We're going to do that on behalf of the patron. We'll search for an item. Let's copy the item barcode for future reference. We'll create a request for this item on behalf of a patron. Patron physical item request. We'll use my user. Notice that this user has a user group of staff, and immediately we encounter our first issue. The system tells us that no items are available for the request due to policy. Now, in trying to understand what the problem might be here, let's realize that so far the ALMA has only two pieces of information, namely the particular item that we're requesting, and second of all, the user who is requesting it, the patron. With those two pieces of information, we need to do a little bit of investigation. As we mentioned, the patron is a staff user. In other words, the patron has a user group of staff. The item, however, is something we'll need to investigate a bit further in order to see where this item is held. The item's location, the library's main library location is stacks, will determine the fulfillment unit in which this item is related and the particular fulfillment unit rule which is applicable to this scenario, the scenario consisting of the particular item and the particular patron. So let's look in the configuration for the fulfillment unit of this particular location, the main library stacks location. We can do that in one of several ways. Just for an example, we'll go to the fulfillment configuration menu under the main library. Clicking on physical locations and searching for the stacks location, we'll see that this location is part of the general fulfillment unit. Let's go now to the general fulfillment unit on the institution level, of course. Opening up the general fulfillment unit, we can confirm that the stacks location of the main library is indeed part of this fulfillment unit. And if we go now to the fulfillment unit rules, what displays here is the loan rules. We haven't made a loan yet. We're trying to make a request. Let's take a look at the request rules. And looking at the rules from top to bottom, it seems that the first rule applies to a situation in which there's an item policy. That's not our situation. The second rule applies to a scenario in which the patron is a faculty, user group of faculty. The third rule seems to be the rule that fits our scenario, namely that the patron is user group staff. Let's open up the rule just to verify that. And indeed we see that the parameters, the input parameters for this rule are user group equals academic staff or staff, which is the user group of the patron that we were using. So now that we've identified the fulfillment unit rule, the request rule that's pertinent for this particular scenario, let's take a look at the request terms of use that apply to it and see if we can understand why the request was not accepted. And in fact, we can see the very first policy, is requestable, indicates that this particular item is not requestable by this particular user group. So if we want to resolve that situation, we can go to those terms of use. Let's take the name of these terms of use, 3-month staff general. We're talking about the request terms of use. We'll go back to the terms of use. We'll search for that terms of use. Open it up. And modify the is requestable policy so that the value is now requestable. By saving the changes to this terms of use, that new policy change is going to be automatically applicable to our scenario. So let's try it again. Let's take that barcode. Here's the barcode we tried to request previously. Let's try to submit the request once again. Same item, same user. And we see that in fact that did not resolve the issue. That apparently was a necessary configuration change. However, that was not sufficient to resolve this particular issue. There are, of course, additional configurations which affect the requestability of any particular item. We know, for example, that when an item is requested, it needs to be requested to a particular location. It could be that the locations that are available are simply non-existent. In other words, that there are no locations available due to some configuration issue. Let's take a look at that possibility. If we go back to our terms of use, the request terms of use, we'll remember that there are a few different policies there that affect the pickup locations. Here's our 3-month general staff terms of use, request terms of use, and we'll see that the pickup locations policy allows for pickup of these items, those items that are requested under these terms of use, to be picked up in the campus of the library which owns the item. The main library apparently is on a particular campus or could be on a particular campus, and this policy will allow requested items that are owned by the main library to be picked up at any other library that's on the same campus as the main library. However, we remember that pickup locations policy affects requests not only when the item is on shelf, but also when it's not on shelf. The pickup locations policy is filtered, as it were, by an additional policy, and that is the on-shelf request policy. This is the policy that would be applicable when the item is on shelf. And of course, as we remember, there needs to be some coordination, some overlap between this policy, the on-shelf request policy, and the pickup locations policy. If the pickup locations policy precludes all pickup locations that are allowed by the on-shelf request policy, of course, we would not have any possible pickup locations. That might explain the issue. We see here that the value of the on-shelf request policy here is to use the value of this policy as determined by the fulfillment unit. We don't know offhand what that is, so let's go back and take a look. See? On the fulfillment unit, we're talking about the general fulfillment unit. we'll see on the first tab of the fulfillment unit that the current on-shelf request policy for the fulfillment unit, the policy that was configured in the terms of use to be used for this particular scenario, is request for pickup in different campus only. So in fact, what we have here is a contradiction. The pickup locations policy in the applicable request terms of use allows for pickup of the item only in libraries on the same campus, whereas the on-shelf request policy allows for pickup of requested items only in libraries on a different campus. So this contradiction has basically no overlap. We've configured a situation in which there are no possible pickup locations. So if we change this policy as just one example of how we can resolve this issue and save those changes, if we go back now and try to request this item, having resolved two issues that prevented the request, we see now that we're at least past that first stage. So that resolves the first scenario, namely the desire to create a patron physical request for a particular item. Let's continue, however, with the request workflow and imagine now that we're able to create the request that our patron is interested in receiving this item, the requested item, at his office. We remember that there's a personal delivery option that allows patrons to receive requested items either at their home or at their office. This is configurable. If we select the pickup at location now, we look for the office delivery link, and it is not. Here we see under personal delivery, home delivery. However, office delivery is not available in this list. So if we ask ourselves why, how we configure, or why the office delivery is not in this list and what we need to do in order to check that, we'll remember that there are several different parameters that go into configuring the availability of personal delivery, namely home and office delivery. The first is the request terms of use. So going back to the request terms of use that are pertinent to our scenario, let's copy it here so we'll have it for future reference. If we open this up in edit mode, we'll see that the personal delivery policy is currently set to allow personal delivery only to the patron's home address. We have several different options here, either to disallow personal delivery, or to allow personal delivery at home, or at the office address of the patron, or at the home or office address of the patron. The current value is the home address. Let's change that to all. And this, we anticipate, will now allow the office delivery option to appear in the pickup locations box, pickup at box of the request. So let's refresh the request. We hope not to see office, and in fact, office delivery is still not appearing here under personal delivery. Well, there are additional configurations that may be contributing to this. Of course, what we've just corrected, the personal delivery policy in the request terms of use, was a necessary configuration, but apparently, again, not sufficient. We know, of course, that the patron must have a office address in order to make it possible to submit a request to receive the item at the office. If the patron record has no office address, then it would not be possible for that patron to submit a request to receive the item at their office address. So let's just take a look at our contact information for our patron, and in fact, we see, not surprisingly, that the addresses section contains no address for this patron's office, only for their home. So let's configure an address, office address, in this case a work address, for our patron. Okay, having added the work address or the office address. Let's go back now and see if we can successfully submit a request for pickup at the patron's office address. Opening the pickup at drop-down, we see, in fact, that the office delivery now appears. So apparently, it was necessary to configure those two things: the personal delivery policy in the request terms of use, as well as ensuring that the requesting patron has a office address or a work address in their record. So having selected now office delivery, we have resolved this scenario and the issue that the office delivery option was not appearing. Let's go ahead now and submit this request. And we receive an error, failed to save the request. In other words, despite the fact that we're able to select the office delivery option as our pickup location, there is apparently another configuration that's required in order to enable this request to be submitted. And that configuration, of course, is in the circulation desk. We need a circulation desk at the owning library which supports the personal delivery option. So let's take a look at the main library circulation desk. Main library, of course, being the library which owns the item that we're attempting to request for office delivery. And we see, in fact, that the circulation desk of the main library does not support personal delivery. So we select that here and save that configuration change. So let's try once again. To submit this request for office delivery. Having configured now all three of the parameters that regulate the personal delivery terms of policy and the request terms of use, the contact information, specifically the work address on the patron, and the circulation desk at the library which owns the item. Let's try once more to submit the request. And in fact, we meet with success. Okay, that completes this scenario. Let's go on to another scenario now. Let's say that instead of requesting the item for office delivery, our patron wanted to request the item for delivery to the graduate library, the graduate school library. Let's delete the existing requests and create a new request for that item, but this time for delivery to a different library, namely the graduate library. And we see that the graduate library, in fact, does not appear in the list of potential pickup locations. This reminds us of the issue we had just previously in the previous scenario about the office delivery not appearing, but we understand that the configurations that we made in order to resolve that issue aren't really pertinent in this case. There's no particular policy that affects this. The item is requestable, and it's not a question of the circulation desk or of the patron's address. So there must be something else going on here. When you have a situation like this, where you're attempting to request an item to a particular location which does not appear in the drop-down, the first thing to check is the relationships that exist between the two libraries, the library which owns the item and the library which is the requested or desired pickup location. So let's take a look now at the relationships that exist on the main library. And specifically for the graduate library, which indeed is the library that we would like to select as our pickup location, we see here that the graduate library appears in the table as having only a circulate for relationship. The main library has a circulate for relationship with the graduate library, but not a deliver to relationship with the graduate library, which means that the main library is not willing to, as currently configured, is not willing or not able to send its material to the graduate library. So let's assume that that was a mistaken configuration, that the main library does business with the graduate library, is willing to send its material to the graduate library, and therefore we'll select the deliver to checkbox in this table for the graduate library. We'll save the change, and let's go once more to attempt our request for pickup at the graduate library. We hope now that the graduate library will appear in the drop-down. In fact, it does not. Having configured the relationship between the main library and the graduate library is not all there is to it. Let's remember that in order to request an item to a particular location, a particular library, the circulation desk of that library must, of course, have a hold desk. By definition, if there's no hold desk, there's no way for the library, or the circulation desk at that library, to receive the item that's being transited to it from the other library. In this case, the main library is transiting an item to the graduate library. The graduate library circulation desk may not have a hold shelf, in which case it could not receive that item. ALMA checks that possibility already at this stage of the request, and if that's the case, would not display the graduate library here. So far that's speculation, well, a little bit more than speculation, but let's go take a look at the graduate library now and see if in fact we can correct the configuration. Here's the graduate library. We go to the circulation desk, and in fact we see that the graduate library does not have a hold shelf. So let's give the graduate library a hold shelf. We need to configure the additional parameters related to having a hold shelf. We'll save that change and go back now to our request. And hope that now we will be able to select the graduate library as a pickup location, and in fact the graduate library does appear. Let's submit that request, and successfully, and that concludes this third scenario. Let's follow this scenario to the graduate library. Having requested the item for pickup at the graduate library, it will need to be retrieved from the shelf in the main library and scanned in at the main library circulation desk in order to be transited to the graduate library. Here, in fact, ALMA tells us it needs to be transited to the graduate library. Let's go now to the graduate library and scan in this item at the circulation desk there. And we expect that it will be placed on the hold shelf for the patron who requested it. The patron will receive notification that his request is now being placed on the hold shelf in the graduate library, and they can come pick it up. Let's scan it into the graduate library circulation desk for placement on the hold shelf. And in fact, we're successful. The patron has received the notification. They come into the graduate library in order to receive the item that they've requested. They come to the circulation desk. The staff there swipe the patron's card and have access now to the patron record so that they can check the item out. They scan the barcode of the requested item and receive the following pop-up: item cannot be loaned from this circulation desk. Now we need to think carefully about what the problem might be here. The request was successful. It was submitted successfully. The graduate library appeared in the drop-down. We know that there is a relationship between the main library and the graduate library that allows the main library to deliver its material to the graduate library for circulation. The fact that the graduate library circulation desk cannot now check that item out to the patron whom requested it may be an indication of the relationship not between the main library and the graduate library, the delivered to relationship we saw previously, but rather the circulate for relationship, which would allow the graduate library to circulate material belonging to the main library. Let's take a look at that configuration. The important point to remember here is that these relationships between libraries are not automatically symmetrical. In other words, configuring it on one library does not automatically configure the complementary relationship on the other library. So we have a strange situation here in which the main library was able to circulate its material, to deliver its material to the graduate library, but as we see here, the graduate library is not able to circulate its the main library's material. The graduate library has no circulate for relationship with the main library. Let's therefore select this checkbox in order to expand the relationship between the graduate library and the main library. Obviously, this is a mistake. The main library is delivering its material to the graduate library. Surely the graduate library needs to be able to circulate the main library's material. We'll update that relationship here and click Save. We'll get a pop-up indicating that the relationships that we've now configured for the main library are in fact redundant to the relationships, to some other relationship that exists. We can see here that it's in fact redundant to the relationship that exists for all other libraries. The main library is no longer an exception to all libraries, and therefore we can allow that main library row to be removed, and the main library is now back in the general configuration of all libraries having a deliver to and circulate for relationship. The graduate library having a deliver to and circulate for relationship with the main library together with all other libraries except, of course, the law library. See, here's an exception. Let's save that and go back to our patron waiting patiently at the graduate library circulation desk. Let's attempt now to check out the item once more. And in fact, the item is successfully loaned to the patron. That concludes the fourth scenario. Let's go on now to a different scenario having to do with loans and not requests. Let's go back to the main library for this particular scenario. We're going to search for an item that the patron takes from the shelf instead of requesting it and brings to the circulation desk in order to check out the item. In other words, there's no request involved in this particular scenario, only a loan. We'll select this item for checkout. The patron brings the item to the circulation desk at the main library, the main library being the owning library. The librarian swipes the patron's card, swipes the barcode of the item, and attempts to check it out to the item. What we see here is a block indicating that the item is requested by another patron. We can override the block, and the item is successfully loaned out. Now let's notice something peculiar here, and that is that the loan date, which is the 28th of January, is in fact the same as the due date. Having just checked out this item, the item is going to be due on the same date. That obviously indicates some kind of misconfiguration. That's not the intention of the library here. And so our next task is to resolve this particular issue. Why, given that the item has been loaned successfully, the due date is given the same as the loan date. In order to understand this issue, let's remember that the due date is determined by the loan terms of use. So let's go back to the loan terms of use. Let's first of all delete this loan. And go now to the loan terms of use that are relevant for this particular scenario. We'll go back to our fulfillment unit rule. In the general fulfillment unit, previously we looked at the request rule. Now we'll look at the loan rule. Again, we assume that it's the 3-month staff general rule. Let's take a look-see. Yes, indeed, this is the user group of our user, and this is the relevant terms of use. Now we're talking about the loan terms of use. We see the different policies pertinent for loans, and we see that all of the policies relevant for this particular terms of use. If we look at the due date says 3-month loan, so that in and of itself does not explain why the item was loaned only till the end of the library's day. However, we do recall that we got a pop-up when attempting to check this item out, indicating that there was currently a request on that item, and that leads us to look at the requested item due date policy. This is the due date that will be applied to a loan in the event that there is an existing request for that item at the time that the item is checked out to a different patron, which in fact is our scenario. We see here that the value of this policy is 0 days. Apparently, the intention in making this configuration was that there should be no different requested item due date. In other words, in the event that there is a request on an item that's being checked out, the due date should not be affected by the fact that there is a request. Rather, the due date that should be given to the loan should be the same as the due date policy determines. Let's take a look at that particular policy, the requested item due date policy, in the context of this terms of use. We'll open the terms of use. Now we're looking at the loan terms of use, which conveniently has the same name as the request terms of use. Searching for that and opening it up, in fact, we see the requested item due date policy of 0 days. The correct configuration for this intention, assuming the intention here is that the existence of a request should not affect the due date, is not 0 days, but rather none. If we open up that policy in edit mode, we'll see that we have a value type here that allows us to select none. Alternatively, we can select other and give a value similar to what we had previously. This was our downfall, as it were. This was the error that led to the situation that we encountered, the issue that we encountered of the loan being due on the same day as it was loaned. The correct configuration here, if we understand the intention, is that the value type should be none. With this value type, requested item due date none, we expect that now we should be able to loan the item to the patron, and the fact that there is an existing request for that item should not affect the due date. We expect a 3-month due date on the basis of the due date policy that we saw in the loan terms of use. Loaning the item now, in fact, gives us the due date that we were expecting, and that resolves this particular issue and, in fact, concludes the final scenario. Let's just have a brief review of the things that we've seen in this session today. We saw a number of different scenarios. Each one encountered issues that were resolved by making one or more changes to the configuration, and we saw a number of different configuration parameters that needed to be updated or modified in order to resolve those issues. The first thing we saw was the request terms of use, and we saw how the request terms of use can affect the ability to place requests. For example, if the is requestable policy is no requesting. And we saw also how the request terms of use can affect the selected desired pickup location, our ability to select the desired pickup location. We saw the fulfillment unit on-shelf request policy and how that needs to be coordinated with the pickup locations policy in the request terms of use. We saw the patron address and how the absence of a particular address, either for home or work, can affect the availability of personal delivery. We saw configurations in the circulation desk and how these can affect the ability to select a pickup location. For example, if no hold shelf, or if the personal delivery is not supported by the circulation desk. We saw the importance of relationships between libraries, the main library and the graduate library, the deliver to and the circulate for relationships, and how those relationships can affect our ability to select a pickup location if no deliver to relationship exists, and how they can affect our ability to check out items that are owned by other libraries. Finally, we saw the loan terms of use and saw how the requested item due date policy can affect the due date for a loan when there are existing requests for that item. That concludes our troubleshooting session. Thank you very much for your participation. If you have any questions concerning the session, please do submit them to your project team in advance of our question and answer session. We look forward to seeing you at the next training session soon. Bye for now.